Beneath a raging snowstorm, she was running, fleeing a place once called home, but that had become a living hell. A mother dog was slowly losing consciousness, using the last warmth in her body to shield her fragile puppy. Behind her were those who had stripped dogs of their fur, treating living beings as nothing more than merchandise, then abandoning them to the cold. Not far away, a Navy SEAL and his dog were walking home through the snow, unaware their path was about to change. Then the dog stopped frozen in place as instinct surged, sensing a life crying out beyond human hearing. Because one instinct was not ignored, the fate of innocent lives began to turn. If this story touches you, tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for what comes next. The storm arrived like a decision already made. Snow fell thick and sideways across Route 9, turning the long northern highway into a stalled ribbon of red brake lights and exhaust. Engines idled. Wind pressed against doors and fenders with patient force, as if testing which machines still believed they were in control. Nash Calder kept both hands on the wheel. 35, about 6'1". Lean, compact, strength-built for endurance and control, not display. His face was clean-shaven, jaw square and set, cheekbones sharp under skin that looked pale at first glance, but carried the dry, wind-burned tone of a man who'd spent too many winters outdoors. Dark brown hair, clipped in a military cut that had grown just a fraction past regulation, stayed flat beneath the hood of his jacket. His eyes, gray-blue, didn't dart. They mapped. Beside him, Coda watched the storm with the stillness of a trained sentinel. The German Shepherd was black and tan, 5 years old, full-grown, calm in the way only a working dog could be. His ears stayed upright despite the wind's tantrum. Amber-brown eyes tracked movement beyond the windshield with measured attention. He didn't whine. He didn't bark. He simply breathed slow and steady, as if waiting for the world to tell the truth. A pickup ahead fishtailed, then stopped at an angle that blocked both lanes. Someone leaned out a window and shouted something into the wind. The storm shredded the words like paper. Another driver slammed a door in frustration. The wind answered by falling harder. Nash checked his phone. No signal. He turned the heater down a notch, conserving battery, then looked at Coda. "That's not moving anytime soon," he said quietly. Coda's tail gave one low wag. Agreement, not excitement. Nash unbuckled. He didn't rushing was how people made mistakes and broke ankles. He pulled on gloves, zipped his worn tactical combat shirt higher at the neck. The olive gray fabric had softened with years of use, lightly frayed at the cuffs and shoulders. His combat pants brown earth, with a hint of green, were scuffed at the knees, pockets sagging slightly from constant use. Old military work boots hit the pavement with solid certainty when he stepped out. The cold slapped his face clean. Snow stung his cheeks and eyelashes. He clipped Coda's leash onto the simple black leather collar, leaned close to speak near the dog's ear so the wind couldn't steal it. "We're walking. Stay tight." Coda stepped out first, paws crunching, body angled slightly into the wind like he'd done it before. They moved along the shoulder, passing cars filled with faces pressed behind glass, people watching them, as if watching a test they'd already decided not to take. Nash didn't return their looks. He knew that stare. Hope disguised as helplessness. The quiet prayer that someone else would go first. A narrow side road appeared, half hidden by drifted snow and young pines. It led toward a ridge and then down toward Nash's cabin, his small place above town where the lights looked like distant stars and the silence didn't ask questions. Not the safest route, just the quietest. He turned without announcing it. The world changed once the trees closed around them. Traffic noise faded, replaced by the sound of wind combing through branches. The air smelled sharper here, pine sap, frozen earth. Snow fell straighter, heavier, as if gravity had gotten serious. Nash walked with economy, not stiff, not loose-balanced. His mind did what it always did in weather like this. Measured distance, calculated risk, counted breaths. He didn't think of the teams in words anymore. He thought in habits. Watch the edges. Trust the ground. Don't let your hands get clumsy. Coda kept pace at his left, not pulling, not lagging. Then Coda stopped. The leash went taut. Nash's posture shifted instantly. Weight balanced, shoulders loose, eyes scanning. What is it? Coda's ears angled forward. His nose lifted, drawing in the air with deliberate purpose. He stared into a thicket of brush and young firs to their left, body still as stone. At first, Nash heard nothing but wind, then barely a sound, thin, fragile, wrong for weather. Not the squeal of branches, not ice shifting. Something alive trying not to be. Nash took one careful step closer, heart slowing instead of speeding. You sure? He murmured. Coda didn't look at him. He tugged once firm, but controlled, then loosened the leash, waiting. A signal, not a demand. Nash pushed through the brush. The sight stopped him in a way the cold never could. A white-coated dog lay half-curled in the snow. Her fur was thick and unusually bright snow-white in a way that looked rare, even under gray sky, but now dusted with frost and shadowed by dirt where she'd dragged herself. Against the winter ground, she almost disappeared, as if the storm had tried to erase her and hadn't quite managed. She was large, built for endurance, and the shape of her shoulders hinted at strength that had been worked hard. Pressed against her chest was a puppy, weeks old at most. Its white fur was short and soft, damp with melting snow, pale enough to blend into the drift like a dropped piece of cloud. It was so still it could have been mistaken for the landscape. The mother's ribs rose in shallow, uneven bursts. Her eyes were open, dulled by exhaustion. But when Nash shifted his weight, they sharpened just enough to track him. She tightened around the puppy, one last barrier against the cold. Coda moved ahead of Nash, then stopped several feet away. He lowered himself slowly into the snow, neither threat nor submission. Presence. Respect. Nash crouched, keeping his movements measured. He spoke low, steady. Hey, easy, you did good. Up close, he saw more. Beneath the white fur, along her neck, a thick, uneven scar rope-like tissue, the kind left by something too tight for too long. One foreleg trembled at an angle that wasn't right. Snow clung to her whiskers like salt. The puppy let out a faint sound, more breath than voice. The mother tried to lift her head, failed. Still, she held. Something tightened behind Nash's ribs, an old familiar ache he didn't have a name for anymore. Not pity, not rage. Something quieter and heavier. Responsibility landing without ceremony. He slipped off his outer layer and draped it carefully over them, leaving space for air. "Okay," he whispered. "We're not rushing this." He knew the rules. No direct heat, no shock. Warm slowly. Let the body remember. He lifted the puppy first, so light it barely registered, and tucked it against his chest beneath the fabric, sharing his own heat. The pup's tiny body was cold enough to make his skin flinch. Nash ignored the reflex. Then he slid his arms under the mother's chest and hindquarters. She was heavier than she looked. All muscle, all work, utterly spent. His boot slipped on packed snow. Before he could adjust, Coda stepped in and braced against Nash's leg, steadying him with solid weight. No sound, no fuss, just the quiet competence of a dog who understood the assignment. Nash let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. Figures. He carried her carefully, adjusting his grip so her injured leg stayed supported. Coda walked close, matching pace, head low and focused. They climbed out of the brush and into open wind again. Snow stung Nash's eyes. His arms burned. His breath scraped his throat. He kept moving anyway. He told himself it was just physics. Distance to cabin, heat source, time window. But that wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was simpler and harder. He couldn't leave them. Not after seeing the scar beneath the beautiful white coat. Not after hearing a puppy's breath so thin, it sounded like the world was negotiating with it. Halfway up the ridge, the mother dog stirred. Her head lifted with visible effort. Instead of looking at Nash, or the puppy pressed to his chest, she turned her gaze back toward the grove they'd left behind. Against the storm's white glare, her pale face stood out sharply, eyes dark and alert beneath frost-dusted fur. Her ears flicked once. Then she pressed her nose briefly against Nash's wrist, right where his old military watch rested against skin. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't gratitude. It was precise. Like a coordinate. Coda froze. His posture changed, subtle but unmistakable. Ears forward, spine tight, listening to something Nash couldn't hear. Nash paused, breath fogging in front of him. He scanned the white space between the trees. Nothing moved. No footsteps, no voices. Only wind and falling snow. Yet the sense of being watched settled over him like another layer of cold. "All right," Nash murmured, more to himself than to either dog. "I see you." He adjusted his grip and continued, the mother's strange gesture replaying in his mind like a signal he hadn't learned to decode. The cabin came into view through falling snow, a dark shape against white. Nash kicked the door shut behind them, sealing out the storm. Warmth met them slowly, the smell of wood and old smoke grounding him. He lowered the mother dog onto a blanket near the stove, close enough to catch heat, far enough to avoid shock. He kept his hands gentle, even as his mind ran fast. Coda took position beside her without instruction, body angled so he could see both the door and the dogs. Nash unwrapped the puppy and tucked it between layers of towel and wool. He warmed water bottles, wrapped them in cloth, positioned them near, not against the pup's core. He watched for any sign of distress, waited. Then he turned back to the mother. checked her breathing, her gums, the way her chest moved. The scar at her neck seemed to stare back at him from beneath that luminous white coat, beautiful, rare, and marked by something that had not been kind. He fed the stove, adjusted blankets, moved in slow cycles, warm, check, adjust. Outside, the wind worried the eaves, testing the cabin's edges. Inside, time took on a different shape. The puppy's chest rose and fell, weak, but present. The mother's eyes stayed open, tracking Nash with quiet calculation. Not begging, not thanking, watching, like a creature who had learned that survival depended on reading hands and doors. Nash sat back on his heels, exhaustion brushing the edges of his focus. The room felt small and honest, the kind of place where you couldn't pretend your choices didn't matter. He rested one hand briefly against the floor, steadying himself, and allowed a single thought to surface unwanted, but true. Some roads didn't ask for your name. They waited to see what you'd do. Outside, the storm continued its work. Inside, 2 lives chose to stay. And Nash Calder, who had spent years learning how to close doors, realized he'd just opened one. Morning arrived without ceremony. The storm had moved on sometime before dawn, leaving behind a quiet so complete it felt deliberate. Snow lay in clean, uninterrupted sheets around the cabin, smoothing every edge, muting every sound. Light filtered through the frost-laced windows in pale bands, the kind of northern light that didn't warm so much as reveal. Nash Calder woke in the chair by the stove, his spine stiff, his right shoulder aching in the familiar way cold always found. He'd slept in short fragments, 10 minutes here, 5 there, waking each time the fire shifted or a breath in the room changed rhythm. He stood slowly, joints protesting, and checked the fire before anything else. Still good. Embers glowing low and steady. On the floor near the stove, Aurora lay on her side atop layered blankets. Her white coat, thick and striking, even dulled by exhaustion, caught the morning light and reflected it softly, almost silvered. She lifted her head when Nash moved, eyes tracking him with guarded awareness. Not fear. Calculation. Between the blankets, Ember was tucked close to her chest. The puppy's body was still impossibly small, but its breathing had found a rhythm, overnight, shallow, yes, but consistent. The white fur along its ribs rose and fell in quiet determination. Nash crouched and checked again. Gums, breath, temperature at the ear tips and paws. No signs of shock, no sudden drops. The slow method was holding. Coda lay a few feet away, head up, ears alert. He hadn't slept either. The black and tan shepherd shifted his weight slightly when Nash knelt, adjusting so he could see both the dogs and the door. His eyes flicked to the window once, then back to Aurora. "You're still with us," Nash murmured, more observation than reassurance. Aurora didn't answer, but her ears angled toward his voice. A small thing. Enough. Nash fed the stove another split log, careful not to spike the heat. He warmed water and replaced the bottles near Ember, rotating them the way he'd once rotated men pulled from cold rivers, slow, deliberate, respectful of bodies that had nearly forgotten their own tempo. The scar at Aurora's neck revealed itself again as she shifted. It was thick and uneven beneath the white fur, the skin drawn tight in a way that didn't come from a single accident. Nash had seen scars like that before. Rope burns, collars left on too long, pressure without mercy. He didn't touch it yet. Instead, he moved to the window and scanned the tree line beyond the cabin. Snow glittered untouched. No tracks near the porch. No movement. Whatever Aurora had looked back toward on the ridge last night had left no trace this morning, or knew how not to. The thought settled uncomfortably. By mid-morning, Ember stirred enough to make sound. It wasn't a cry, more a thin complaint, a question posed to the air. Aurora's body tightened immediately, her head lowering until her nose brushed the puppy's back. Her breathing quickened, then steadied, as if she'd reminded herself the danger had passed. For now, Nash took it as his cue. He made the call he'd been putting off since dawn. Cell service returned in fragments once the storm moved east. It took 2 tries before the call connected. Northridge Veterinary, a woman answered. Her voice was steady, practiced. Dr. Hart, please, Nash said. There was a pause. Then a different voice came on the line. Calm, direct, faintly tired. This is Lila. Dr. Lila Hart arrived just after noon. She drove a compact SUV that looked perpetually dusted with road salt, its back seat packed with crates and medical bags. In her late 30s, she was tall, without being imposing. Her build spare in the way of people who walked a lot and stood longer. Dark brown hair was pulled into a low knot at the nape of her neck, strands already escaping as if they'd never agreed to stay put. Her skin held a warm undertone that stood out against the cold light, fine lines at the corners of her eyes betraying years of nights like this. She took in the scene the moment she stepped inside, Aurora's posture, Ember's stillness, the way Coda placed himself between her and the door without baring teeth. Hypothermia, she said quietly. Not a guess, a map. But you did this right. Nash stepped back and let her work. Dr. Hart moved with efficient gentleness, hands warm, touch firm enough to be useful. She checked Ember first gums, reflexes, temperature, then Aurora's leg, the neck scar, the way her muscles tensed without snapping when touched. She's disciplined, Dr. Hart murmured. That kind of restraint isn't instinct alone. Aurora watched every movement, pale eyes never leaving the vet's hands. When Dr. Hart leaned too close to Ember, Aurora shifted just enough to place her body between them. No growl, no threat. A boundary drawn with precision. Dr. Hart noticed. So did Nash. Severe cold stress, the vet continued. Light frostbite on ears and paws. The pup's young but strong. They both are. She glanced up at Nash. How long were they out there? Long enough, he said. Dr. Hart nodded once. She didn't ask for more. She finished her exam and sat back on her heels. They'll need monitoring for the next day or 2. Fluids for her. Warmth, slow feedings for the pup. I'll leave supplies. She hesitated, then added, I should scan for a chip. Aurora stiffened. Nash felt it immediately, the change in the room. He placed a hand on Aurora's shoulder, light but present. Easy, he said. The scanner beeped. Dr. Hart's eyes flicked to the screen. She's registered, she said. Local. The word landed heavier than it should have. Local meant history. History meant explanations that were rarely kind. We can't keep her indefinitely without cause, Dr. Hart continued. But if there's documented neglect, we can intervene. Nash nodded. He already knew the shape of that road. They worked in quiet coordination through the afternoon. Dr. Hart left detailed instructions, her handwriting precise, clipped to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a pine tree. Before she left, she crouched near Coda, letting him sniff her glove. He approved her with a single, restrained tail wag. "You've got good instincts," she said to Nash. "Both of you." When the door closed behind her, the cabin felt larger and lonelier. Nash fed Aurora a small amount of warmed broth. She took it cautiously, eyes never leaving his face. Ember nursed weakly, then slept. By late afternoon, Nash noticed something that didn't sit right. Along Aurora's flank, the white fur thinned in irregular patches, not shedding, not matting. Clipped poorly, as if someone had rushed the job or didn't care about symmetry. He frowned and leaned closer, careful not to startle her. Coda stood abruptly. He crossed the room and stopped near the corner where Nash had set his pack. Nose low, tail stiff. He sniffed once, then again, then let out a low, controlled huff that never turned into a growl. Nash followed his gaze. From the pack, he pulled out a length of cord he'd found half buried near the ridge that morning, something he'd pocketed without fully understanding why. It wasn't thick, not rope. Something synthetic, cold to the touch. Coda's ears pinned back, his body angled protectively toward Aurora. Nash's jaw tightened. Aurora lifted her head and fixed her gaze on the cord. Not on Nash, not on Coda, on the object. Her breathing changed faster, shallower, and her body drew inward, curling subtly around Ember. A tremor ran through her foreleg, the injured one, and for the first time since Nash had found her, she made a sound. It wasn't a whine, it was a single, sharp breath forced through clenched teeth. Coda stepped forward, placing himself between the cord and Aurora without being told. Nash lowered the cord to the floor and slid it out of sight. Aurora's breathing eased. The room exhaled. Nash sat back on his heels, the implication settling slowly, heavily. This wasn't just exposure. This was escape. As evening fell, Nash stepped outside to check the perimeter. Snow had begun to soften, the top layer turning granular under his boots. Near the tree line, he spotted faint impressions, not fresh, but not old either. Tracks partially erased by drifting snow. Boot treads, vehicle marks where a vehicle shouldn't have been. He photographed them with his phone. Angles, scale, coordinates. Back inside, Aurora watched him return, eyes sharp despite fatigue. Ember slept, chest rising steadily now. Nash sat by the stove again, hands clasped loosely, mind running through possibilities he didn't like. He didn't know who would come looking. He didn't know what Aurora had been used for. But he knew one thing with a certainty that felt almost calm. Whatever had left that scar beneath her beautiful white coat hadn't earned her loyalty. Outside, dusk settled over the ridge, turning the snow blue-gray. The cabin lights came on one by one below, the town slowly remembering itself. Nash fed the fire and stayed where he was. Some choices didn't announce themselves. They waited until you were ready to admit you'd already made them. The knock came just after noon, not loud, not hesitant either. 3 measured raps against the cabin door, enough to announce presence without apology. Coda was on his feet before the sound finished traveling through the room. The German shepherd's posture shifted from watchful to anchored. Head high, ears forward, body angled not toward the door directly, but between it and Aurora. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply placed himself where he believed he belonged. Nash noticed. He always noticed. Aurora stirred on the blankets near the stove. Her white coat had regained a hint of its former brilliance after a day of warmth and care, the fur along her shoulders catching the light with a soft silver sheen. When she heard the knock, her ears flicked back. Her breathing changed, not panic containment. Ember pressed closer to her chest, a small white curve of warmth and trust. Nash stood, slow and deliberate. He took one step toward the door, then paused long enough to place a steady hand on Coda's collar. "Stay," he said quietly. Coda obeyed. His eyes did not leave the door. Nash opened it. The man on the porch looked like Winter had never quite decided what to do with him. Clyde Rourke stood just under 6 feet, broad through the shoulders, posture slouched as if he'd grown accustomed to carrying weight badly. He wore a heavy brown coat, a size too large, the cuffs darkened by old stains. His beard was uneven thick in places, thin in others, suggesting neglect rather than style. A scar split the skin above his left eyebrow, pale and jagged, old enough to have faded into the shape of his face. His eyes were a dull hazel, quick to assess, slower to settle. The kind that counted exits without calling it fear. "Afternoon," he said, voice rough, but not unfriendly. "Name's Clyde. I'm looking for my dog." Nash didn't step aside. "What kind of dog?" Clyde's gaze slid past him, just for a fraction of a second, toward the warmth inside. "White German shepherd. Female. Big coat. Unusual. Hard to miss." Aurora made a low sound, not a growl. A breath pulled tight. Coda's tail stilled. Nash studied Clyde's face while the man talked. There was no urgency in his voice, no relief. He spoke as if reclaiming property, not finding something lost. "How'd you lose her?" Nash asked. Clyde shrugged. "Storm hit fast. She spooked, took off. Happens." Nash waited. Silence had a way of making people feel it. "She's chipped," Clyde added after a beat. "Registered. County should have called you by now if you scanned her." Nash nodded once. "We did." Clyde's shoulders eased, not gratitude. Expectation. Inside, Aurora shifted. Nash stepped back, just enough to allow Clyde a clear view into the cabin. He didn't invite him in. Clyde saw her immediately. Aurora lifted her head. For a moment, just a moment, her tail moved. A cautious, restrained wag. Recognition, not welcome. Her body remained low. Her weight stayed centered over Ember. Her eyes never fully met Clyde's. Clyde smiled, quick and thin. "There she is." Knew she'd find somewhere warm. He took a step forward. Coda stepped forward too. No sound, no flash of teeth, just a barrier. Clyde stopped. His eyes flicked down to the dog, then back up to Nash. "Yours?" "Yes." "Good dog," Clyde said, but there was no warmth in it. He reached into his pocket. "I've got papers." Nash took the folded documents, scanned them. Registration matched the chip number Dr. Hart had read. Name, address, on the outskirts of town. No obvious red flags. No easy win. Dr. Lila Hart arrived not long after, called in by Nash before he'd opened the door fully. She stood a few steps back from Clyde, her expression neutral, her eyes sharp. She took in Aurora's posture, Ember's closeness, the way Coda hadn't moved an inch. "She's been through hypothermia," Dr. Hart said calmly, "and she's injured." Clyde waved a hand. "She's tough, always has been." "That scar on her neck isn't from weather," Dr. Hart replied. Clyde's jaw tightened. Dogs get into things. Aurora flinched. It was small. Enough. Nash saw it. "So," Clyde said, forcing a chuckle, "can we wrap this up? I've got places to be." The room felt smaller, suddenly. Nash looked at Dr. Hart. She met his gaze, held it, then gave a slight shake of her head. "Not enough. Not yet. We don't have legal grounds to hold her," she said quietly, "not without documented neglect." Clyde exhaled through his nose. "Hear that? Let's go, girl." Aurora didn't move. He stepped closer. Coda's chest lifted. His stance widened. Still no sound. Nash crouched beside Aurora. He spoke softly, not to command, just to inform. "It's okay. I'm right here." Aurora rose carefully, weight favoring her good leg. Ember whined softly as she was lifted, then stilled when Aurora's body closed around her again. The white fur along Aurora's spine rippled under tension, beautiful and rigid all at once. She walked toward the door. She did not walk toward Clyde. Clyde reached out anyway, fingers brushing the fur at her shoulder. Aurora stiffened. Her tail dropped. The cautious wag vanished. Clyde noticed. His smile didn't. "See," he said lightly. "She remembers me." Nash stepped between them. "She's coming," he said evenly. "But don't rush her." Clyde's eyes hardened for half a second. Then he nodded. "Sure." The transfer happened without ceremony. Aurora crossed the threshold. Ember pressed against her chest, eyes half-lidded, trusting the only world she knew. Snow fell lightly now, dusting Aurora's white coat until she nearly blended into the yard. Coda stood at the doorway, watching. Aurora paused at the bottom step. She turned her head, not to Clyde, to Nash. Their eyes met. It wasn't a plea. It was acknowledgement. Then she followed Clyde to the waiting truck. The engine started. Tires crunched over snow. The sound faded down the road. Nash closed the door and leaned his forehead briefly against the wood. Coda came to his side and sat, shoulder pressed lightly against Nash's leg. Not comfort. Contact. "That wasn't right," Nash said. Coda didn't respond. He didn't need to. The rest of the afternoon stretched thin. Nash replayed the scene in fragments. Aurora's body language, the clipped fur, the scar, Clyde's lack of urgency, the way Ember had gone quiet in his arms, as if learning early when noise didn't help. At dusk, Nash stepped outside to clear snow from the steps. Coda followed. Halfway across the yard, Coda stopped. He lowered his head and sniffed the ground where Clyde's truck had been parked. His tail stiffened. His ears flattened. A low sound rumbled in his chest, barely audible, but unmistakable. Nash knelt and touched the spot. Cold metal smell. Oil. And beneath it, something else. Synthetic. The same faint odor as the cord Coda had reacted to the night before. Coda lifted his head and looked at Nash, eyes intent. Then, unexpectedly, he turned and moved down the drive. stopping at the point where the tire tracks veered off toward the old service road that led east. He sat, waited, pointed without pointing. Nash stared at the road. He'd assumed Coda's earlier unease was about Aurora, about letting her go. But standing there now, with the cold biting his knuckles and the light bleeding out of the sky, another possibility settled into place. Coda wasn't asking to follow because he cared. He was asking because he recognized something dangerous leaving. Nash straightened slowly. "Okay," he said, voice low. "I hear you." Coda stood. The road beyond the trees waited, quiet and unmarked, pretending to be ordinary. Night came on clean and sharp. Nash didn't chase. Not yet. He knew better than to move without cause, without evidence. Instead, he went back inside and pulled out a notebook he hadn't used in years. He wrote down everything he remembered times, gestures, words. The way Aurora had flinched when Clyde touched her. The exact phrasing Clyde had used when he said she was tough. Details mattered. Coda lay near the door, eyes open, tracking sounds Nash couldn't hear. Somewhere out there, Aurora and Ember were moving through the dark. And Nash Calder, who had once believed that following rules was the same as doing right, realized the difference was about to cost him sleep. Nash did not follow the road that night. He watched it instead. From the cabin window, he stood with the lights off, one hand resting on the cold glass, the other loose at his side. Snow drifted in slow sheets under the moon, smoothing the tracks Clyde's truck had left behind until the ground looked innocent again. That was how places learned to lie, by letting weather do the forgetting. Coda lay near the door, awake, chin on his paws, eyes open and listening, not waiting for permission, waiting for alignment. Nash understood the difference. He did not sleep much. He never did when something didn't sit right. Instead, he wrote notes in a tight, economical hand. The way Clyde's eyes had slid past Aurora instead of settling on her. The clipped fur along her flank. The word tough used as a shield. He sketched a map of the service road from memory and marked where Coda had sat, where the truck had turned. At dawn, the cabin woke slowly. Light seeped into the snow like diluted ink. The cold had softened, but not enough to forgive. Nash fed the stove, brewed coffee strong enough to bite back, and clipped Coda's leash on without comment. "All right," he said. "Let's see." They didn't take the road. They cut east through the trees, moving with the careful efficiency Nash had learned when following tracks meant more than speed. Coda worked the ground in short arcs, nose low, tail steady. He didn't pull. He didn't hesitate. He checked back once, eyes flicking up to Nash as if to confirm the question had been asked correctly. Nash nodded. The land dipped toward a narrow creek, its surface glazed with ice that hadn't yet decided whether to hold. Beyond it, the trees thinned, and the smell changed metal, damp straw, something sour that didn't belong to winter. Coda stopped. He lifted his head and angled his ears toward a low structure set back from the tree line. A warehouse, or what passed for one. Corrugated metal patched with plywood, roof sagging at the corners. No lights, no sound. The door hung slightly open, as if it couldn't quite be bothered to close. Nash didn't approach yet. He circled wide, eyes on the ground. There, tracks again, multiple sets, boot treads crossing and recrossing the snow, drag marks, paw prints layered over older paw prints, confused and overlapping. Inside the building, the truth announced itself before his eyes caught up. The smell hit first cold iron, old urine, damp straw. Nash stepped just inside the door and stopped. His breath fogged. Coda stayed at his side, muscles tight but controlled. The space was larger than it looked from outside, divided by makeshift fencing. Crates lined one wall. Some were empty. Some were not. White fur caught the dim light in patches. Several dogs lay curled on straw that had long ago lost the pretense of warmth. Their coats were pale, some pure white, some dulled by dirt and shadow, but all shared the same look of containment, as if motion had been discouraged too often. Water bowls sat frozen solid, ice-domed and useless. Nash crouched and let his eyes adjust. He didn't rush in. He counted. He documented with his phone angles, distances, the bowl against the floorboards for scale, the temperature reading he took with a small probe from his pack. -10 inside, colder than outside, the kind of cold that didn't shout. It settled and waited. A length of chain lay half buried in chaff near the back wall, rusted links, a clasp worn smooth from use. Nash photographed it where it lay. Coda moved past him, slow and deliberate, nose tracing a path only he could read. He stopped at a flattened oval in the straw, the imprint of a body that had curled there repeatedly. He inhaled once, deeply, and then looked back at Nash. Aurora had been here. Nash felt it then. Not anger yet. Clarity. The quiet click of things aligning. He stepped back outside and took a wide sweep of the perimeter. Along the creek bank, the ice had been broken recently, dark water licking at the edges. Someone had stood there. Someone had hesitated. Paw prints angled toward the trees and then veered back, as if turned away. He didn't need to imagine the rest. A voice cut across the clearing. "You lost?" Nash turned slowly. The woman stood at the edge of the tree line, bundled in a quilted coat the color of old wool. She was small, late 60s maybe, with silver hair escaping from a knit cap in soft curls. Her face was narrow, lined not by bitterness, but by long attention. Her eyes were sharp and kind in equal measure. "Morning," Nash said. She nodded once. "Name's Ruth Calder, no relation," she added, glancing at him with a flicker of dry humor. "I live up the bend." She gestured with her mitten toward the building. "That place hasn't been right for years." Ruth's voice carried the steadiness of someone who didn't embellish. She spoke of nights when the wind carried small sounds, no barking, just the kind of noise you make when you're trying not to be heard. She spoke of soup left by the door that froze untouched. Of a man who came and went, mostly went. "Clyde," Nash said. Ruth's mouth tightened. "Figures." Nash asked if she'd be willing to say it again, to someone who would write it down. Ruth studied his face for a moment, measuring whether he would carry her words carefully. "If it helps those animals," she said, "I'll say it twice." They stood together in the cold, the warehouse crouching behind them like a thing ashamed of itself. Coda had gone still. Not alert still. Focused still. He moved past Nash and Ruth and slipped inside the building again. threading between crates with purpose. He stopped near a stack of warped pallets at the back wall and sat. He didn't sniff. He didn't paw. He simply sat and looked at the floor. Nash crossed the space and knelt. There, half hidden beneath the pallets, lay an old leather collar, cracked with age, its metal tag bent. The inside edge was dark, with a stain that wasn't rust. Coda did not touch it. Aurora's collar. Nash photographed it where it lay before lifting it with a gloved hand. The leather was stiff, the smell faint but unmistakable. He bagged it carefully. Behind him, Ruth pressed a mitten to her mouth. "I always thought there was more," she said quietly. Nash didn't trust his voice yet. He trusted the evidence. By afternoon, the picture had edges. Nash drove to the gas station at the edge of town, a bright island against the snow. Inside, warmth hummed and coffee steamed. The clerk, a young man with tired eyes and a beard that had lost an argument with winter, looked up. "Can I help you?" Nash asked about security footage from the night of the storm. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. The clerk's expression shifted from caution to recognition. "Guy came in late," he said. "Bought whiskey. Truck wouldn't start in the cold. Name on the card was Rourke." The footage was grainy, time-stamped just after midnight. Clyde stood at the counter, shoulder slumped, jaw shadowed by unshaven stubble. He paid. Left. Came back for a second bottle. On his way out, he paused, looking past the glass as if the dark itself were a mirror. Nash saved the clip. Not a confession. Better. A piece that fit. He drove back toward the warehouse as the light thinned. Ruth met him again near the tree line and gave her statement into his phone, her voice steady even when the words weren't. She didn't dramatize. She didn't need to. When Nash finished, he thanked her. "Just don't let it go back to being quiet," she said. "Quiet's how this happened." As they spoke, Coda stood a few paces away, body angled toward the creek. Nash followed his gaze. The water moved beneath ice, patient and persistent. Nash understood then what Coda had been doing since the beginning. He wasn't pulling Nash toward Aurora because of affection. He was orienting him toward the current that would carry the truth if you knew where to step. Nash loaded the evidence into his truck and made the calls he'd been circling all day. First to Dr. Hart, then to the county animal welfare officer, Maya Ortiz, mid-30s, voice clear and direct. The kind that didn't confuse calm with softness. "I have enough for an emergency hold," Maya said after Nash laid it out. "Send everything tonight. If he shows up at the clinic, they don't release the animals." "Understood," Nash said. He ended the call and sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, breath steadying. The old reflex to move fast pressed at him. He set it aside. This wasn't an operation. It was a record. Night came on clean. Nash returned to the cabin with Coda at his side. He uploaded the files, labeled them with care, and watched the progress bar inch forward like a promise that required patience to keep. When it finished, he stepped onto the porch. The wind had shifted. Somewhere down the slope, an engine coughed and went quiet. Coda stood beside him, eyes on the dark. Nash didn't open the door. He didn't speak. He waited, letting the night decide what it would bring. The county building smelled like old paper and coffee that had given up. Nash Calder sat on the wooden bench outside animal welfare intake, his back straight, hands resting loosely on his thighs. He had dressed no differently than he always did. Olive gray tactical shirt, softened by years, brown combat pants scuffed at the knees, old work boots bearing the quiet evidence of long use. He didn't dress to persuade. He brought records to do that. Coda lay at his feet, leash slack. The German shepherd's ears flicked now and then at passing footsteps, but his body remained calm, grounded. He had learned the cadence of waiting. Inside the office, printers hummed. A door opened and closed. The building did not care about storms or scars or white fur. It cared about forms, signatures, timestamps. Nash preferred it that way. Maya Ortiz stepped out first. She wore a navy jacket with the county seal stitched at the shoulder. Dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail that didn't pretend to be comfortable. In her mid-30s, she moved with the clipped efficiency of someone who had learned to carry urgency without dramatics. "You did the work," she said, handing Nash a clipboard. "Photos are clean, metadata's intact, witness statements solid." Nash skimmed the pages. He had already memorized them, but habit mattered. "What about the clinic?" "They're flagged. No release without clearance." Maya paused, then added, "We'll need law enforcement for the seizure." As if summoned by the word, a man rounded the corner carrying a cardboard tray of coffee. Deputy Evan Brooks looked like someone who'd grown into responsibility reluctantly and then decided to do it right anyway. Early 40s. Broad shoulders that suggested farm work before patrol cars. Sandy hair cut short. Beard trimmed neat enough to pass inspection without chasing fashion. His eyes were steady, observant, the kind that noticed where people stood in relation to doors. He set the coffee down and extended a hand. "Evan Brooks, Sheriff's Office." Nash shook it, firm, brief. "I've read the file," Evan said. "I'll say this straight, you didn't jump the gun." "That's not my habit," Nash replied. Evan's mouth twitched. "Good, because we'll need it to stay clean." They went over the plan in practical terms. Warrant parameters, timing, animal transport, vet availability, no speeches, no promises. Just a shared understanding that mistakes made here would land on someone who couldn't speak for themselves. When they stood to leave, Coda rose with Nash, posture relaxed but alert. Evan noticed the dog and nodded once, respectful. "He's working," he said. "Always," Nash replied. The warehouse looked smaller in daylight. 2 county trucks rolled in first, tires crunching over old snow. The sky hung low and pale, the cold sharp enough to keep breath visible. Nash stayed back while Evan and Maya approached the door. Procedure mattered. The door creaked open. Inside, the air was colder than outside, trapped and stale. The dogs reacted immediately, heads lifting, bodies stiffening, some whining softly. White coats shifted in the dimness like broken pieces of light. Nash documented while the team moved. Crate numbers, conditions, frozen bowls. He kept his distance, letting the professionals do what they did best. Then Clyde Rourke arrived. His truck pulled in fast, stopping crooked. He got out with his jaw already set, coat unbuttoned despite the cold, beard darker than it had been days before. His eyes found Nash immediately. "What the hell is this?" Clyde demanded. Evan stepped forward, badge visible but not waved. "Sir, we have a warrant for seizure due to suspected animal neglect." Clyde laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Neglect? Those dogs are fine." One of the white-coated dogs whined, a thin sound that cut through the air. Maya didn't flinch. "Sir, Step back. Clyde's gaze flicked to the dogs, then to the crates being opened, then back to Nash. You, he said. You don't know what you're doing? Nash met his eyes. I know what I saw. That bitch ran, Clyde snapped. Left the pup. That's not on me. The words landed like broken glass. Nash felt Coda shift beside him, muscles tightening, breath changing. He placed a hand lightly on the dog's collar. Coda held. Evan's voice cut in, calm and firm. Sir, that's enough. Clyde took a step forward anyway. Before anyone could react, one of the white-coated dogs slipped past the handler's legs. She moved with sudden purpose, limping but determined, straight toward Nash. Her coat was dulled with grime, but the shape of her head, the set of her ears. Aurora. She stopped inches from Nash's boots. For a heartbeat, everything went quiet. Aurora lifted her head and pressed her nose against Nash's hand, right where his fingers hung loose at his side. Not frantic, not fearful, choosing. Coda stepped forward and stood shoulder to shoulder with her, calm as a stone set in place. Clyde swore and lunged. Evan moved faster. Hands up, he barked. Aurora didn't move. Nash didn't either. The moment broke as handlers closed in, gently guiding Aurora back. Ember appeared next, carried carefully in a padded crate, small white body peeking out, with dark, curious eyes. The pup made a soft sound when Aurora passed, and Aurora answered with a low, steady breath. Something in Clyde's face shifted then. Not anger, not panic. Calculation failing. The seizure took hours. Dogs were loaded one by one, tagged and documented. A mobile vet unit arrived, heaters humming, blankets unfolding. Dr. Lila Hart moved among them, her hands sure, voice low. She paused when she reached Aurora and Ember, eyes flicking to Nash. They'll be okay, she said. Nash nodded once. He trusted her. Clyde was cuffed without drama when the additional violations stacked conditions, prior complaints, falsified records uncovered by Maya's call to the county clerk. Evan read the rights cleanly. Clyde listened with the flat attention of someone already rewriting the story in his head. As the trucks pulled away, the warehouse emptied of sound. Snow began to fall again, light and persistent. Nash stood with Evan and Maya, breath fogging, watching taillights disappear down the service road. That moment, Evan said quietly, with the dog. Nash didn't answer right away. He watched the falling snow fill in the tracks. Animals don't testify, he said. They indicate. Evan nodded. Jury'll see the rest. That evening, Nash returned to the cabin alone. Coda drank water, ate, then lay by the door, as if expecting footsteps that didn't come. Nash uploaded the final files, labeled them, sent them where they needed to go. When the last confirmation pinged, he closed the laptop. He sat by the stove and let the quiet settle. The work wasn't over. Court would take time. Outcomes were never guaranteed. But something fundamental had shifted. He reached down and rested his hand on Coda's head. The dog leaned into it, solid and warm. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like breath being let out. Inside, Nash Calder allowed himself to believe, just for the night, that records could carry truth farther than voices. The shelter was quiet in a way that felt earned. Not the hollow quiet of abandoned places, but the steady, breathing kind heat humming through vents. Water bowls clinking softly when a dog shifted. The low rhythm of life choosing to continue without announcement. Nash Calder stood just inside the entrance, hands in his jacket pockets, letting his eyes adjust. He had learned not to rush rooms like this. Places that carried damage needed to be entered with respect. Coda walked at his side, black and tan coat catching the overhead lights in dull bands of gold. He moved slower here, head low, reading scent and sound the way Nash read terrain. His ears flicked once, twice, then settled. They were expected. Dr. Lila Hart came out from the back hallway carrying a clipboard and a mug that smelled faintly of burned coffee. In her early 40s, she had the posture of someone who spent long hours on her feet, straight-backed but flexible, movements economical. Her auburn hair was tied in a loose knot that had given up on perfection hours ago. Her face held tiredness without bitterness. "You came alone," she noted, not as a question. "Didn't want to bring noise with me," Nash said. She nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "They're stable, still skittish, especially her." They both knew who her meant. Aurora lay in the far kennel, separated from the others by a low barrier and a curtain pulled halfway across. Her white coat had been cleaned, brushed, restored enough that its true color showed again. Not the gray of neglect, but a pale, luminous white that caught light softly, like snow that hadn't yet been stepped on. She watched Nash the moment he appeared. Not fear, not excitement. Recognition, held carefully. Aurora rose slowly, weight shifting with caution, then sat. Her posture was straight, but not rigid. The way working dogs sat when waiting for instruction that might never come. Her eyes, dark, observant, never left Nash's face. Ember was curled against her chest, a small white shape breathing in shallow, even pulses. The pup's ears twitched once, then relaxed. "She doesn't sleep deeply," Lila said quietly. "None of them do yet." Nash crouched just outside the barrier, keeping his hands visible, his movements unhurried. Coda sat beside him without command, tail resting on the floor, body a steady anchor. "May I?" Nash asked. Lila slid the latch open. "Your presence doesn't spike her stress. That's unusual." Nash stepped inside. Aurora didn't retreat. She leaned forward just enough to smell him, then paused, as if deciding whether scent alone was enough. When she exhaled, it was long and controlled. Coda shifted closer, not invading, not crowding, his shoulder aligned with Nash's knee. Aurora's ears angled toward him. She studied Coda with the same seriousness she gave Nash, then looked away first. Trust offered in fractions. They spoke little at first. Nash rested his forearms on his knees, posture loose, but ready. He felt the weight of the last days settle into his bones now that there was nothing left to do immediately. The adrenaline had burned off, leaving the familiar ache behind. Lila broke the silence. "You know what happens next." "Court," Nash said. "Paperwork, time, and decisions," she added. "Placement, long term." Aurora shifted, adjusting Ember gently with her muzzle. A movement so practiced, it suggested repetition born of necessity. "She won't thrive in just any home," Lila said. "Neither will the pup." Nash didn't answer right away. He had learned, in other contexts, the danger of answering too fast. Ember stirred. The pup pushed unsteadily to its feet, white legs trembling, then toddled forward with determined clumsiness. Aurora watched closely, but did not stop her. Ember crossed the short space between them and reached Coda first, The German Shepherd lowered his head immediately, making himself smaller. Ember sniffed his muzzle, sneezed, then pressed her forehead against his nose with surprising insistence. Coda froze. Not stiff still. Nash felt the shift before he saw it. Coda's breathing changed, slowed, synced. His tail made one careful sweep against the floor. Aurora let out a sound then. Not a bark, not a growl. A low, breathy huff approval, maybe, or release. For the first time since Nash had met her, Aurora lay down fully, her chin touching the concrete. Lila exhaled softly. That, she said, is not coincidence. Nash didn't argue. That evening, the shelter lights dimmed to night mode. Nash stayed longer than visiting hours allowed. No one asked him to leave. He sat against the wall, knees drawn up, while Coda lay curled nearby, close enough to be felt even without touch. Aurora slept in fragments, waking often, checking Ember, checking the door. Outside, snow began to fall again. Lighter this time, less cruel. Lila returned once more, carrying 2 blankets. She set one gently over Aurora and left the other by Nash. You don't have to decide tonight, she said. Nash looked at Aurora's white form, at Ember's small body, rising and falling. I know. Good, Lila replied, because when people decide out of urgency, they confuse rescue with ownership. She left him with that. Nash drove back to the cabin alone. The road was clear, plowed clean by morning crews. The trees stood dark and tall, their branches heavy with snow that reflected the moonlight in pale flashes. He parked, shut off the engine, and sat there longer than necessary. Inside the cabin, the quiet felt different now, less like refuge, more like space waiting to be redefined. He fed Coda, hung his jacket, washed his hands slowly as if trying to scrub off something that wasn't dirt. When he sat by the stove, he didn't turn it on right away. Instead, he listened, not for danger, for absence. 2 days later, Nash met Maya Ortiz at a diner on the edge of town. She sat in a vinyl booth with her coat still on, dark eyes sharp despite the early hour. Her coffee was untouched. They're offering a plea, she said without preamble. Reduced time. No animal ownership for 10 years. Restitution. Nash nodded. And the dogs? Released to the county, adoption pipeline. She paused. Unless a qualified foster steps forward. Her gaze didn't waver. Nash stirred his coffee once, twice. Aurora won't make it through that system. Maya didn't pretend surprise. I know. Neither will the pup. That's why I'm here, she said, not officially. Outside, boy, a snowplow passed, scraping sound echoing down the street. I'm not looking to collect, Nash said. I don't need another responsibility. Maya's mouth curved slightly. Funny thing about responsibility, she said. It tends to find people who don't go looking for it. That afternoon, Nash returned to the shelter. Aurora was awake when he arrived. She stood this time, stepping forward without hesitation. Ember followed, sturdier now, tail flicking in brief, excited arcs. Coda greeted them with quiet dignity. Nash knelt, meeting Aurora at eye level. He didn't reach out. If I take you, he said softly, not knowing why he spoke aloud, it won't be easy. There will be rules, space, work. Aurora tilted her head. Ember barked, a small, sharp sound, more breath than voice. Coda huffed, amused. Lila watched from the doorway, arms folded, a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. She already knows, she said. Knows what? That you're not offering comfort, Lila replied. You're offering structure. Aurora stepped closer and placed one paw on Nash's knee. Not begging, claiming balance. That night, Nash slept poorly. Dreams came in fragments, snowfields, doors half open. The sound of breath held too long. He woke before dawn, heart steady but alert, the way it always was when something in his life was about to change shape. Coda was already awake, sitting by the door. Nash didn't ask what he was watching. At the shelter, Aurora waited at the gate. No hesitation, only readiness. Nash signed the paperwork with a steady hand. Temporary foster. Evaluation period. He read every line. They left as the sun broke over the tree line. Aurora stepped into the cold air and paused, lifting her head, tasting the wind. Ember pressed close to her flank. Coda stood just behind them, quiet and watchful. For a moment, all three dogs faced the same direction. Nash locked the shelter door behind them, keys heavy in his palm. He didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in a long while, that uncertainty didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a beginning that hadn't yet learned how to announce itself. The cabin accepted them without comment. Nash Calder unlocked the door and stepped aside, letting the cold roll past him into the warm, pine-scented quiet. He had learned long ago that places, like people, needed room to decide whether they would welcome change. Aurora paused at the threshold. Her white coat caught the amber light from the porch, turning soft silver at the edges. She did not rush. She did not lower her head. She stood tall, tasting the air, reading the space beyond the door the way she read storms by, listening first. Ember pressed against her flank, a small white shape vibrating with curiosity. The pup's ears flicked, then she took a half step forward and stopped, checking Aurora's posture before continuing. Coda waited behind them, black and tan silhouette steady and familiar. His tail moved once, slow and neutral, a signal of calm rather than invitation. Take your time, Nash said quietly, though he wasn't sure who the words were for. Aurora stepped inside. The floorboards creaked under her weight. She froze, ears angling, then relaxed when nothing followed the sound. Ember hopped forward, nose low, tracing the edges of the room with the serious concentration of a scout mapping unknown ground. Nash closed the door gently. The first hours passed in careful increments. Aurora inspected the cabin methodically, corners, windows, the narrow hallway that led to the back room. She marked nothing. She claimed nothing. She observed. Coda shadowed her at a respectful distance, offering presence without pressure. When Aurora stopped, he stopped. When she moved on, he followed, never stepping ahead, never crowding her space. Nash watched from the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold. He didn't interfere. He had learned that control was not the same as safety. In the back room, Aurora paused by the old couch. She circled once, twice, then lay down with a slow exhale that carried the faintest tremor. Ember climbed over her forelegs and curled against her chest. Only then did Aurora close her eyes. Nash felt something in his shoulders ease. Night fell early. The wind picked up outside, combing through the trees with a low, steady sound. Snow tapped against the windows like a question asked politely and often. Nash set out 3 bowls water first, then food. He kept the portions modest. Routine mattered more than generosity. Aurora rose when he approached, but did not retreat. She watched his hands, not his face. Ember toddled toward the bowl, sniffed, then sneezed and looked offended. Coda waited until Aurora took the first bite before lowering his head to his own bowl. Later, Nash laid out blankets near the stove. He didn't point. He didn't coax. Aurora chose the spot herself. She settled with her body angled toward the door, Ember tucked beneath her chin. Coda lay a few feet away, parallel rather than opposite, his breathing deep and even. Nash sat in the chair by the window and let the night do its work. Sleep came in pieces. Nash woke before dawn to the sound of movement that wasn't quite noise. He sat up, heart steady but alert. Aurora was standing. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't anxious. She stood still, head lifted, eyes fixed on the dark window, as if listening to something beyond human hearing. Coda rose beside her, posture neutral but attentive. Nash followed their gaze. Outside, the trees moved slowly, weighed down by fresh snow. Nothing else. Aurora didn't growl. She didn't bark. She echoed, long and controlled, then lay back down. Nash didn't ask questions he couldn't answer. Morning arrived pale and quiet. Nash made coffee and fed the stove. The cabin filled with soft light and familiar sounds. He moved through his routine deliberately, grounding himself in small tasks. Aurora watched him with new eyes, still cautious, but curious now. When he stepped outside to check the weather, she followed to the door and stopped, waiting. "Not yet," Nash said, not as an order. She accepted it. Later, he clipped leashes to collars, Coda's first, then Aurora's. Ember's was last, adjusted carefully, the strap still a little too big for her neck. They stepped into the snow together. The clearing beyond the cabin was wide and open, framed by tall pines that caught the light like sentinels. The air was sharp and clean, the kind that burned just enough to remind you that you were alive. Aurora walked slowly, testing the ground. Ember bounced forward, tripped, recovered, and bounced again. Coda kept to Nash's left, eyes scanning without urgency. They moved as a unit, awkward but intact. Rehook. Halfway across the clearing, Aurora stopped. Her ears angled forward. Her body stiffened, not in fear, but in focus. Nash followed her line of sight to the tree line. There, half buried in snow, lay an old scrap of fabric caught on a low branch, white, torn, stained faintly with something darker that had long since frozen and faded. Aurora stared at it, unmoving. Nash felt the air change. He stepped closer, careful not to startle her. "It's old," he said quietly. "Not from here." Aurora didn't look at him. Coda moved forward, sniffed the fabric once, then turned back to Aurora and sat. His posture was deliberate, an offering of information, not alarm. Aurora's breathing slowed. She blinked once, then turned away from the tree and continued walking. Nash stayed where he was for a moment longer, then followed. He didn't know why the moment stayed with him, only that it did. The days that followed found their rhythm. Aurora learned the boundaries of the land, walking them each morning with increasing confidence. Ember grew stronger, her steps surer, her curiosity expanding in every direction at once. Coda adjusted without fuss, shifting his routines to accommodate theirs. He corrected Ember gently when she crossed the line, stepped in without aggression when Aurora tensed, and withdrew when space was needed. Nash observed. He adjusted. He learned where to stand and where to step back. One afternoon, a truck pulled up the drive. Maya Ortiz stepped out, coat buttoned against the cold, clipboard tucked under one arm. She moved with her usual economy, eyes taking in the scene before she spoke. "You look different," she said. Nash shrugged. "Less noise." She knelt to inspect Aurora, movements calm and predictable. Aurora watched her closely, but did not retreat. Ember attempted to climb Maya's knee and was gently redirected. "Evaluation period's going well," Maya said. "Court date set. Final hearing next week." Nash nodded. "And after?" Maya met his gaze. "After, the county will recommend permanent placement." "With me?" "Yes." Aurora stepped closer then, placing herself between Nash and Maya, not blocking, not aggressive, simply present. Maya smiled faintly. She already decided. That night, Nash dreamed of doors. Not the violent kind, not the ones kicked in or breached. Ordinary doors, cabin doors, shelter doors, courtroom doors that opened quietly and stayed open. He woke before dawn, heart steady, the dream lingering without demand. Coda lay near the hearth. Aurora slept fully now, her side rising and falling in deep, even breaths. Ember twitched in her sleep, chasing something only she could see. Nash stood at the window and watched the sky lighten. He thought of all the times he had believed vigilance meant standing ready for what might come to take something away. He was learning, slowly, that it could also mean staying for what arrived, asking to remain. The final hearing came and went without spectacle. Paperwork, statements, signatures. The decision was read in a room that smelled faintly of old wood and cleaner. The words were formal. The meaning was not. Permanent placement approved. When Nash returned to the cabin that evening, he didn't announce the news. He didn't need to. Aurora met him at the door and pressed her forehead lightly against his leg, a gesture that carried no urgency, no fear, just certainty. Coda watched from a few steps back, tail still, eyes bright. Ember barked once sharp, triumphant, then immediately forgot why she had barked at all. Nash laughed. The sound surprised him with its ease. That night, he replaced the porch light. The old bulb came down. A new fixture went up softer, steadier, casting a wide amber circle across the snow. Not a warning, an invitation. Aurora stood beside him as he worked, ears flicking at each sound. When the light came on, she blinked against it, then settled. Ember sat and stared at the glow as if it were something magical. Coda lay down and sighed. Inside, the cabin held. The bowls were full. The blankets were warm. The quiet was no longer empty. Nash stood on the porch, a moment longer than necessary, breath fogging the air, the past resting where it belonged. Behind him, not gone but no longer leading. He stepped back inside and closed the door, not to keep the world out, but to keep what mattered in. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, in the middle of an ordinary day, through a choice to stop, to listen, and to care. Maybe God does not always remove the storm. Sometimes He sends a sign instead, a small voice, an uneasy feeling, a pair of eyes asking for help, and waits to see who will answer. In our daily lives, we often rush past those moments. A stranger we could have noticed, a kindness we almost offered, a door we almost opened. This story is a reminder that faith is not only something we speak about, it is something we live in small decisions when no one is watching. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us which moment stayed with you the most. And if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. May God bless you and your family. May He protect the vulnerable, strengthen the weary, and guide every heart that is still searching for light.